Thank you so much, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to come and chat here today. I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence and what it is all about. And I'm going to talk, I have to warn you, I'm going to talk about math. So if that puts you to sleep, go grab a Coca, okay, and come back. I'll wait. I see mathematics everywhere now. I started this company 5 years ago, Cylance, and before that, I liked math, but I didn't love it. I loved statistics. I loved the ability to predict things using statistics and understand the world. But I certainly was not a lover of mathematics. Now I've had to become one because that's all we do at Cylance. And we use it to predict. But I want to step back a little bit and actually help all of you understand how big this solution really is. And forget about Cylance. Just think about how we've implemented this technology and where it can be applied in your world every day, regardless of cybersecurity in general, okay? I thought one of my favorite quotes of Einstein is, if you can't explain something simple and simply, you simply do not understand it well enough. So I try to do that with the Hacking Exposed books. I don't know if anybody's heard of Hacking Exposed book, but we printed that. I started that a long time ago, and the very idea behind the book was always to make it incredibly simple to follow and to make it very recipe driven. So it's like hacking is like following a recipe. You do step 1, then 2, then 3, and then pop, you get the computer. You get to own it, or you own the network. And so I'm going to attempt in my best form possible to actually explain very complex mathematics in a very simple way, and especially around artificial intelligence. It's a little hard to read up there, but let me read it to you. At the heart of, I believe, artificial intelligence is really a simple concept, and that is, first find a rhythm. A rhythm can be found in music. It can be found in the daily solar cycle, 24 hours in a day. It can be found in the seasons of the year, but there's a rhythm, something that becomes almost predictable 100% of the time. If you find a rhythm in something, okay, then you find a pattern. And if you find a pattern, then you find an algorithm. And if you find an algorithm, mathematics is right behind it, okay? So math, really, ultimately, can predict the future. If a rhythm can predict the future, and you can break that rhythm into a pattern, into an algorithm, and into math, then math can predict that future too. So that's my premise. That's my scientific method claim, okay? So let's see if we can prove that. I'm going to give you 3 concepts today, 3 mathematical concepts. One you've probably heard of, maybe a couple of these you've heard of, and maybe one is brand new. And I'm trying to show it very simply. The first one is phi. And this is found all around the world in varying forms. The second is pi. You've probably heard and seen and used this, certainly in school mathematics, I'm sure. And then Pompilius's magic factor. And the reason why I bring that up is because it was the moment of revelation for me in how ubiquitous or how worldwide mathematics is to everything that we do. So I'll walk through each. So phi, now you've probably heard of something called the golden ratio. If not, you've seen it many times in the nautilus shell. The nautilus is an animal that has been around for, I think, 3 million years, something crazy. So it is one of the longest living organisms out there in the world, multicellular, and it has created a shell that is pure magic. when you look at it and in its function. And you can break down the shell itself into a mathematical formula. It actually represents this golden ratio, or this magic number called phi, which ends up being 1.618 out to about 20 or so digits. You can think of it here. Considered an irrational number. Now, phi is also a formula that you can derive with the simple math of 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2. Now, don't get too hung up on the formula. Just remember the 1.618. Now, that formula is also represented here inside of the shell with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Now, that's called the Fibonacci sequence. This is a sequence of numbers that if you simply add the prior number, starting from 0 to the next number, you get the next number. So 0, 1, 1 gets 2 plus 1 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, etc., etc. Okay, this is the Fibonacci sequence, famous sequence. And that's built into the same golden ratio, okay, and phi. Now, Leonardo da Vinci was very famous for this Ferruccian man, which he was able to actually demonstrate that parts of our body, many number of parts of our body, actually represent this same golden ratio. So, for example, you can take the palm of your hand and you can look at your nail on the finger. That should be about half of your first knuckle. Okay, that's 1 and 1. Then all of that, if you times that by 1.618, you get the size of your next knuckle and the next. And then your palm, if you times the length of your palm by 1.618, you get the length of your forearm. Okay? It's present in the body, in the human body, all over the place. It's also present in, for example, snail shells and the pattern that occur on the snail. And this is incredibly predictable. It's pretty much 100% of the time, unless there's some genetic anomaly. But this is where it gets really interesting. The female to male ratio of bees in a hive is exactly 1.618. Why would that be? Pineapples actually represent Fibonacci and the golden ratio, with how each of the spirals get created around the pineapple. Same thing with sand dollars, and same thing with pine cones. The most interesting and the most iconic of this golden ratio is the sunflower. And the spirals out from the center, the sunflower makes for the seeds. Now, phi is present in all of these systems, and the more I get to look for this in nature, the more I can see it can predict a lot inside of nature. However, I had no idea how powerful it was until I saw this. If I had known that phi could have predicted Trump a year ago, I would have been much better prepared. It's a funny thing, but I mean, it's almost like half true, right? It's like, this is hilarious. Okay, so let me give you the second concept, pi. Now, you know pi is 3.14, and this is a number that is another irrational number. This one never ends. I think computers have built it out, for billions of digits, trying to find a repeating pattern or an end, and they can't. And pi is found in some of the most interesting places in human nature or in biological nature as well. So, for example, the double helix of the DNA, the spiral is actually bound by pi. The way light reflects off of a surface is bound by pi. If you drop a pebble in a pond, the radiating circles are bound by pi. Even Heisenberg's uncertainty principle has pi inside of it, okay? So pi is present everywhere. But it gets pretty interesting here. Pi is actually a big part of probability equations. So when you try to predict something being probable or not probable, likely or not likely. Pi is a powerful part of that. And this is a fun one that you can do with your kids. This is what when I learned about this one, I ran home and did it with I've got 4 teenagers. So I'm constantly looking for something fun to do, right? So we took matches. And what you do is you take 100 matches and you draw out a grid, just like this, on a piece of paper. And the space between these lines needs to be the size of the match. Okay? Now, then you drop 100 matches and you count how many of these matches actually cross one of these lines versus does not cross these lines. And that number, almost to perfection, can be predicted with this formula using pi. Now, I don't know about you, but when I learned about this one, it sort of freaked me out a little bit. Like, okay, why would pi be a part of probability? I sort of get it a little bit with matches, the rotation, the size, the diameter, etc. But when you start to realize that it's pretty much darn near everywhere, both pi and phi, for example, are inside of the curvature of a wave that you see every day out in the ocean. It's present in spiral galaxies. It's also present in storms, thunderstorms, hurricanes, typhoons. You can, so much so that you can predict, in many cases, where the path of that particular storm is going to go. That's why when you look at hurricanes like Irma or Jose or what have you, those mathematical models that you'll see on the news, all bound by pi or phi to some degree to predict the course of it. Even man-made structures actually have pi or something very, very close to it built into it, as well as phi. So if you take the height of a pyramid, one of the Giza pyramids, divided by the length of one of the sides, so basically the diameter, you'll get a close approximation. So the third concept I want to give you, and this one was the real epiphany for me, or the real awakening or revelation, was the nautilus shell. Now, I brought it up earlier with regard to the golden ratio, but there's one more secret inside the nautilus shell. Each of these chambers holds air, and it's what allows the nautilus to float up or down by pushing out more air or taking in more air into the shell. It's a buoyancy control system. Well, each chamber, starting from the very first one, I probably can't, oh yes I can, so right here, this very first chamber, each subsequent chamber is slightly bigger than the next. But it's not bigger by an addition, it's bigger by a multiplication. So each chamber is exactly 1.08 times the prior chamber's size. So nature not only knows addition and number sequences, but it actually knows multiplication. Math is inherent in nature. This was, to me, like I started to get it then. A little history on that observation out of Rome. My ultimate conclusion had to be nature is mathematical. Just because we don't understand every part of nature, applying it to math doesn't mean that it's not mathematical. It probably just means we do not have the capabilities and capacity to understand the math built into the phenomenon that we see in the world yet. So nature is math. That's what I've come to really believe. And this company and the technology that we've built is a big part of that belief. So let me give you a few of these examples. Now, if nature is math, and we all know that inventions come largely from what we see first, right? Getting ideas. Let me give you a few examples of these. So we call it biomimicry in English. I'm sure there's a good word in it in Portuguese. But so let me give you the example of Velcro. So Velcro was discovered and invented by a Swiss engineer in 1943, I believe, when he went out to the field with his dog. And his dog came back with these very thick sticker burrs that get into his hair. Pulling out each one of these was incredibly painful because it stuck so well to the hair of the dog. Well, that turned into Velcro. And of course, you see it everywhere today, in clothes and shoes, cars, you name it. Another great biomimicry example is the bullet train. So bullet trains, their first generation of bullet trains actually caused severe headaches from the sound reverberations that would occur going by train stations or any fixed object. So they studied the kingfisher bird, that when it went into the ocean to grab a fish, made almost no splash, like zero splash. So they applied that same phenomenon onto the front of the train and thereby almost eliminated that problem. Okay? So looking to the world to give us real answers for innovation. Another great story is around the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is actually based on the femur bone. So Gustav Eiffel, the creator or the inventor, engineer, actually was fascinated with the microscope at the time and was studying all kinds of elements in the world, and one of them was the femur bone, and realized that the bone was not solid like they had thought, right? It feels solid, but it's actually quite porous. One of the strongest structures in the world, but it's not solid. And the very porous nature of it is what allows the Eiffel Tower to be so strong and sturdy and last as long as it does. Even CRISPR technology, if you've heard of this. If you haven't, you have to look it up. This is a natural defense mechanism of bacteria to viruses. So if in your body there is a bacteria, and there are billions of them all the time, good and bad, and a virus tries to infect one of those bacteria, the bacteria actually can disable the virus's DNA. It actually cuts the virus's DNA when it recognizes that it's bad and disables it completely. Well, that technology is now being used to solve all kinds of genetic problems. And there are fears of that being used for building, the perfect soldier, the perfect baby, the perfect whatever, right? But again, copied from nature. Neural networks, by its very nature, is designed from the way the human brain, the way we understand the human brain's electrical neurons and signals and learning system work. And this has been the ultimate gift for cybersecurity. We can now train computers just like a human brain would to think, and think far better than us, not just faster and more voluminously, like with bigger and bigger data, but it also never forgets. So if you keep training an algorithm like a neural net computer, you can actually get better and better and better every single time. And that's what a lot of us have started to do. Now, machine learning and AI have been a part of pretty much every industry known to man except for cybersecurity up until about 3 or 4 years ago. It's in the financial district with high-frequency trading, right, and algorithmic trading. It's been in the insurance industry with actuarial science and data science and predicting statistics. Now it's in everything from Netflix recommendations for your movies to Siri on your iPhone, that uses a form of machine learning, to drone stabilization, So drones, I don't know if you remember, but one of the biggest problems of drones getting commercialized was it couldn't quite stabilize properly. It would sort of not quickly enough respond to the problems that it was dealing with at the time. And so now that those algorithms are built into the visual and the gyros that are inside of these things to automatically correct. That's why they can be so stable today. So everyone in the world has basically used AI and machine learning except for cybersecurity until just recently. And this is the main problem, because in cybersecurity, our history is always one of detect and respond. So detect and respond, as you know, is we're going to get hacked, then we're going to reverse engineer it and figure out exactly why we got hacked. Then we're going to send that signature to the world and hope that between when you got hacked and everyone in the world received your signature, that you would be safe and that you would never see that attack. And that's the hope. That's the detect and respond. It's the same scenario that happens at your home, where you simply put up more smoke detectors. You want to stop fires? You can never prevent fires. You just stop fires at some point, right? With a human getting in the mix. So that gives great visibility, but it does not prevent. Does it protect? Maybe. You could argue that it protects, but it requires a human somewhere in the mix to respond. Either to call you up and say your house is on fire, or to send a fire truck or a policeman to your house. So there's no AI built in any of this. There's no learning in any of this. This is simply react and respond as quickly as possible. And inevitably what that creates is this, which is what we deal with every day in cybersecurity. This is what we have to deal with. Hack after hack after hack after hack. And you probably all saw the Equifax hack, right, that came last week. And it's been an absolute train wreck. I mean, one of the biggest in the world. Why? Well, we're now starting to learn why. They didn't have prevention technologies, okay, like Cylance. They had others that were detect and respond. And this one was something that had never been detected before. So they weren't able to prevent it or even stop it in its tracks. Now, I don't blame the past for any of this. It's a natural way to respond to problems. Take, for example, vaccinations. Vaccinations have been incredibly powerful in saving lives around the world. But that is a detect and respond scenario. Somebody first has to get a mutated virus, then create a vaccine, then get it pushed out. It's very much signature-based, just like the antivirus world, right? And it's worked in saving lives, but unfortunately, it doesn't save everybody's life. And the problem has always been we've taken this symptomatic approach. We've looked at the symptoms and tried to find ways to take that and build in detection capabilities, and that's a big problem. We've not taken the problem to the core. Why on earth are these things allowed to execute? That's the core of the problem. So if you think about this whole security space, there are really only 3 ways into systems. There's only 3 types of attacks, at least by my dictionary. The first is execution-based attacks. These are all the traditional viruses and worms and Trojans and APTs and 0 days and all the things that basically execute, run on the target system, okay? Execution-based. Now that's a big market. A lot of people are in that market, and there are both corporate and consumer models to it. And by the way, it's in pretty much 99.9% of all attacks have to execute something. So it's pretty much in every single attack known to man. Identity is the second form of attack, and identity-based attacks take advantage of your identity. And the unique, or not so unique, way that we go about and try to establish that identity. So Can anybody guess what's the most prevalent way we establish identity today? With what? Password, right? The password. And the password is a signature. Password is a known thing to you that can be easily stolen, bypassed, brute forced, cracked. Or the person holding the password can flip. They might love their company yesterday because they brought lunch in, but today they hate them, and they've now changed, and they now want to hurt that company. They have the same password, but they're exploiting their privilege to do more. And then lastly is denial of service, and this is just starvation of resources that are natural, normal, and healthy, but the system's not capable of responding to that many requests in that short a period of time, and that can bring down systems and networks and servers. Now, if you look carefully, and if anybody studied the CISP exam or CISA or any of these things, you'll actually notice each one of these are perfectly mapped to the CIA model: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. They are the model. But execution, identity, and denial of service are the more practical application of those elements inside the model. So what we've done, and what everybody will be doing as you start to incorporate more and more machine learning and artificial intelligence, is building what we call a machine learning workflow. Now, just like the scientific method, you need to start with some hypothesis, or in this case, objective. Then you collect the data that you believe you're going to need. You prepare that data, you filter it, you massage it, you clean it up. You then develop the model through the neural network or whatever algorithms you're using. Train that model based on the set goal of whatever data class you're trying to feed it. You then analyze and evaluate the results of that. You publish, you monitor, operate, and then you go all over again. So if we miss something, you feed it back in. If we call something bad when it's really good, we feed that back in. And it iterates millions and millions and millions of times. And so in this model, it can be incredibly powerful to learn from the past. And that's what us in cybersecurity have to do. I used to go on the road a lot and speak all around the world about hacking. And I used to get up here and I'd demonstrate, I'd hack into your phone live, or I'd hack into a computer you gave me authority to, or I'd hack into one of my systems that are sitting up here. Or I'd bring you up on stage and I'd say, okay, let me show you how simple this is. You're going to hack for me today. And I'd go through it. I've done that, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of times, literally. And almost every single time I've done that, someone in the audience has asked me the question at the end, Stuart, what do you use to protect your own computer? You must be a pretty big target. You know, here you are hacking into systems left and right. You've written this, neat book on hacking. There must be a lot of bad guys that want to bring you down or hack you. So what do you do? Now, back in the day, I was employed by a tier 1 antivirus company. Let's just put it to you that way. It's a multi-billion-dollar antivirus company. Now, when I was asked that question for the first time working for this company, I could have easily lied to the 1,000 people that were in the room, or I could tell the truth and lose my job. Sort of was my two options. But I decided to tell the truth, and I winged it. And I just told him, I said, look, I don't use any product on my computer, and I'm perfectly safe. And of course, you get, whoa, what are you talking about? How do you do that? And I would just say, well, I know what the adversary is capable of. I know the natural and augmented defenses of the system I'm on. I know the zero-day techniques. I know all of the vectors into the device. I just control it myself. If it's not a safe link, I won't click on it. If it's not a safe file, I won't open it. If it's not a safe USB, I won't run it or plug it in. But 99.9% of the world doesn't know the difference of good and bad in all those scenarios. So you need some technology. So I was able to tell the truth and not get fired at the same time. But this is because no one has looked at that process and created a product out of that. And that's what we did at Cylance. So I took all the knowledge that I have had and all the other security professionals that I brought on the company has around how bad guys work, what they build, how they build it, and how they use it. And we then trained a computer to learn every single character, feature, element of all of those. That's what makes the algorithms so smart today. After 3 years of being out there on the street, there's nothing I've seen anything come close to what we're doing in terms of sheer volume and accuracy, etc. And this is a very simple form of how the neural network works. So you have an input layer, so you have elements. And these elements, we have now 3 million elements that we map to today, permutational elements. They could be something as simple as file size, okay? Can be a predictor of good or bad. Max resource depth, file import count, debugger endpoint count, etc. Then you have multiple hidden layers of previously learned knowledge, and you then tell the computer to find the statistical probability of features to good and the statistical probability of features to bad. Turn that into a model, push it to the endpoint. Now, a lot of people have been talking about ML for the last year. Before that, of course, we were the only ones sort of talking about AI and ML, and we were called crazy and ridiculous and a couple of much more colorful words. But today, pretty much everybody's talking about it, right? They say they do AI, they do ML. So what we decided would we put together a generations of ML. So looking at first, second, third, fourth, fifth generations of where we believe this technology has come from and where it will go. And if you look on DARPA is a US defense agency, but they actually categorize AI in 3 different groups: describe, categorize, and explain. Let me explain the difference. Describe is very, very simple. It's almost really pattern-based matching. You say, let's say the AI algorithm is trying to find cats inside pictures, right? It's trying to find pictures that have cats. Describe would be something like, okay, if you ever see an ear like this that points like that and whiskers, that's a cat. So you've described it, 2 things, an ear shape and whiskers. Now go find it. Okay, that's a describe. That's basically pattern matching. Categorize is you've actually fed millions and millions of pictures of cats to a learning algorithm looking at every bit of the picture. And it can tell you, yep, no, we've learned. This is a cat picture and this is not a cat picture. That's categorize. Explain, which we're not there yet in any way, shape, or form, is the next wave. And that is, not only will it tell you that it's a cat in the picture, but it'll tell you why it's a cat in the picture. That's the ultimate last form that we are not there yet on, okay? Now, there is a 0 generation, which I call pure marketing, and there are a number of people that actually just use AI and ML as pure marketing. So I encourage you to dive a little deep when you hear that language. But here's a great guide for you. So first generation in cybersecurity tend to be cloud only for training and prediction. So there's no local prediction. You have very small amount of features, sub 1,000, sub 1 million. Small set of samples, sub 1 million. And they're usually handpicked and hand-labeled. So that means a human is sitting there and goes, oh no, this is ransomware, yeah, that's bad. Oh no, this is Microsoft, that's good. One by one by one, not scalable. So that means the robustness is very low, which means the ability for a bad guy to break that model is easy. Second generation is, okay, you've still got the cloud training, but now you have local prediction, being able to predict locally without going to the cloud whether or not something is good or bad. You have 100,000 features or so. You've got about 100 million samples that you're building from. Still mostly human labeled, but in many cases pattern matched and built on labeled. And it is easy, not trivial, to break. Third generation, really this is where you get into large features like 3 million plus. You have over 1 billion files or samples that you use. Some are handpicked, some are human labeled, but they're also, you can also interpret with nice visualization, and it's moderately robust. Now, most vendors are in either Gen 0, Gen 1, and only a couple really in the beginnings of Gen 2 out there in the space that we've been able to ascertain and understand. Cylance is in the early forms of the third generation, okay? No one is in the fourth and fifth generation today. And this is where it goes into human feedback loops. This goes into unsupervised local training. Today, most of it's all supervised. And we've called out, now this is in a white paper that you can download on cylance.com in our blogs. Just look for the Generations white paper, and you can get much more detail and robustness on this. So us as a company, we've been passionate and persistent since the very beginning to actually solve this problem at its core using purely mathematics to solve this problem, to make it future-proof, to predict and prevent cyber attacks. So you could create a brand new attack never seen before in the world, and we would be able to block it beforehand. Because you've seen the past, you've seen what it does, you've seen what it requires, the performance on the system, on the network, the updates, the incessant problems, and you've seen all of the wraparound technologies that have been sort of symptomatically created to help that simply aren't helping. They're not actually preventing. AI has to be a part of that, and it will be. Not just in endpoint, but in a large part, there are some network players that are actually doing some really good stuff. There'll be identity players, there'll be denial of service players. They aren't there yet, but there will be. And AI, I always want to remind everybody, AI really, for the foreseeable future, will only augment the human today. It's not going to full replace, because the domain expertise is simply too broad and too deep right now in the security profession. Now, 10, 15 years from now, maybe it's coming a different story. But today, the challenges with humans are the obvious ones. It's just there's too much complexity and too much data and too few talented people. So what machine learning gives us is learning from billions of samples effortlessly, continuous learning, and with real-time prevention, and that's the key. So when you think about what a solution should provide for you in cybersecurity using AI or machine learning, it really boils down to these three things. Effectiveness, does it actually do what it says it does? If it says it prevents attacks, then it should prevent attacks, not just old ones, but new ones, okay? Simplicity, does it actually simplify your day and your work? Or does it make it more complex? Do you have to add more layers and more resources? Or do you remove layers with less resources? And then lastly, performance. Does it increase the performance of your endpoint and your user experience and your network? Or does it decrease the user experience, the endpoint, resources, and the network? So finally, just as an overview, us, I don't know if many know of us, we started the company just 5 years ago, so we're not even in kindergarten, really, and we've been able to make dramatic impact in the space so far. We're now over 5.3 million endpoints installed, and 830 people today. So a year ago today, we're about 300 people. Gives you a sense of how quickly we've been growing. And we are the only solution today that uses pure math to do true prevention and prediction. So preventing the attack before it happens. My last story, and then I'll let it go and turn it over to anybody that has questions. We had a conference, a sales kickoff conference a few weeks ago, and we had we had invited customer CSOs to come and talk about their experience in using us. And probably the number one story that resonated across all of those CISOs was the ability for them to actually get to know their family again. Now, that might not be a big deal here. I'm pretty sure it is. It's a big deal everywhere. But being able to, for example, in one person's case, actually being able to coach his daughter's soccer, football practice and team again. He kept having to ask the assistant coach to come and teach because he was always brought in to one crisis after the next after the next. And he attributes Cylance largely to be able to do that. So lastly, I'll leave you with this thought, another Einstein quote. Intellectual people solve problems and geniuses prevent them. We want to actually prevent the problem, not just solve them. Well, with that, thank you very much for your time.